This time we're talking about lights being out in Texas, talking about Senator Ted Cruz and what we need to do now or where Texas needs to go from here. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video today. At this channel, we like to apply logic and conviction to today's news, culture, politics, and whatever other stuff catches my eye. So thanks for being here. I'm C. Scott, and this is my view. A week ago, all the lights in Texas were off. That's an exaggeration. Not all the lights were off in Texas, but a whole lot. The lights were off in Texas, and it happened because there was a winter storm, a cold snap that entered into the area. If you've been to South Texas before, if you know anything about Texas and South Texas in particular, it doesn't get very cold here. And when it does get a little bit cold, it doesn't stay cold for long. And so we had massive power issues, which led to other issues, which led to more issues. I want to give you a little scoop on that, and I want to give you my take on what we need to do now, where we need to go from here. So in Texas on Sunday night, it was Valentine's Day, late Sunday night, early Sunday morning, had some really cold weather move in. Now, a few days before this, it was like 60 and 70 degrees in South Texas. Then all of a sudden, we were in the 40s, and on Sunday night, the temperature started to go down even further, closer to freezing. Now, typically in South Texas, you only have a few days of freezing temperatures in a year. It's not freezing all day. When it does go down to freezing, it'll hit like 32 degrees overnight. And then later on in the day, it'll be 50 degrees. And you have that for a couple days. And then you kind of get out of that kind of weather pattern. So we don't get a lot of cold weather. It doesn't last for long. And basically our power grid was overrun. Too many people want too much heat, too much electricity at one time, and the grid failed. We did have some massive failures in Texas and for our power and for a lot of people. So a lot of people suffered for a few days. I do think most of the situation is being a little bit extra dramatic. A lot of politics that began to be played into it. So let's talk about that. So Sunday night it started to get cold, and we had basically cold temperatures, very, very low temperatures for the areas and for the state of Texas for several days in a row, which doesn't normally happen, but it does happen every 10 years or so. So when the power started to have issues late Sunday night, early Sunday morning, around like 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, power went off. And so going into that Sunday night, they were telling everyone not to use too much energy, not to heat up your home too much because of the dramatic temperatures and things like that. And they knew there was going to be a surge of power on the grid. So they said to expect some rolling blackouts. So when you have a rolling blackout, it means they turn a section off for a short time and then they turn that one on, turn another one off, and they're supposed to be able to save energy that way. Well, when lights went out and the power went out early Monday morning, it didn't come back on for many people until Tuesday, some Wednesday, and some Thursday. So a lot of people didn't have power for a long time. And what made it worse is that the temperatures were lower than they've been in a really, really long time. So when you're in South Texas, especially for native Texans, people that haven't gone anywhere, don't normally go anywhere, don't have a lot of winter clothes, don't have winter coats, and things just got really messed up really quickly. In addition to the temperatures going down, we also had rain, which is rare when you have the freezing temperatures. So we had like record snow, or a lot of snow in some areas, San Antonio and Houston and around that kind of area. So we had some ice, some icy roads, a lot of things were shut down because of that. Then, of course, they were going to be shut down because of the power outages and issues. So as we move forward through the week, somewhere around Wednesday, some of the power is flickering on and off in certain places. And there were other places that didn't lose any power for reasons that should hopefully be explained as they start to investigate what went on. So anyway, particularly in the Houston area, and I know the San Antonio area and some of those surrounding areas, you know, when it's freezing outside, you typically are supposed to wrap your pipes a little bit, and you're supposed to let the water drip also to keep the pipes from freezing. The way they build structures in the South is not the same way they do it up north. The pipes are not buried as low, and there's not as much insulation and things like that around pipes because it typically doesn't get that cold and it doesn't stay cold long, like I said before. So as we get into like Wednesday, water pressure in the city of Houston starts to go down and other places, and then pipes began to burst for people that weren't wrapping their pipes. So many people were causing or leaving their faucets on to drip so that they wouldn't freeze, that it messed up the water pressure throughout the city, in addition to the power issues that were going on in the power plants and stuff like that. And so then the city comes out and says, okay, no more letting your faucets drip, turn them off because it's messing up the pressure. And then as you go on into Thursday and Friday, still having freezing temperatures, more pipes began to burst. So there are lots of things, lots of videos you can see, news reports you can see of pipes bursting. And so when a pipe busts in your house, you have to turn all the water off most of the time. So a lot of people didn't have water because they had a pipe burst. They had to cut the water off, and then just the other water issues. So then you try to go to the grocery store. If you can get out there and brave some of the icy roads, not all the roads were icy the whole time, but some of them were. But of course, when there's, some kind of disaster or something going on, everybody blitzes the grocery store. They take all the bread, all the eggs, all the milk. So there was a lot of food that wasn't available. And so things just kind of started to stack onto each other. Now, there were a number of deaths. I want to say maybe 10 or 11 deaths that are blamed on the storm. But most of those I don't think should be blamed on the storm. I think a number of those should just be blamed on a lack of people not being responsible for themselves. There were some very unfortunate things, but there are also a lot of calls into EMS and the firefighters because they had to respond to carbon monoxide poison because people were heating themselves up in their cars because, again, it was cold, it was dark, it was really, really long. But some people were sitting in their garage with the garage door down and the car on. Even though people used that method to commit suicide, they just wanted to be warm. And a lot of people had issues with that. And unfortunately, some people did pass away because of things like that, which is very, very unfortunate. But you can't really blame cold weather for carbon monoxide poisoning. I mean, if we're going to be responsible, if we're going to be Americans, we want to be adults, we can't all blame the cold weather for taking lives. There's a really unfortunate event where a young person, an adolescent, a kid, 11-year-old, he passed away. And within days, his parents are filing a lawsuit against the power companies, and they don't even have an autopsy yet. And that's an extremely sad situation. I'm sure their grief is immense, but the real issue that we need to pay attention to is that when we have all of our trust, all of our expectation and dependency on the government or people around us, you're going to be in terrible situations. So soon I'm going to make a video and I want to talk about some things that we can do to prepare ourselves for crazy situations so that we're not completely dependent on others, especially not completely dependent on a government, because governments are not made to take care of people well. They never do it well, and that's just a part of human existence. And so if you want to take your matters into your own hands so that you don't have to suffer through situations as much as those that are completely unprepared, make sure you subscribe. So when that video comes out in a couple days, you'll be aware of it. But it's just going to be some tips, a little bit of information, what you can do, what we can do, what I can do to prepare for these types of disasters and just other types of disasters that you don't see coming far in advance. But we've been living this life long enough as humans on the planet Earth to know that we need to prepare for when things get difficult or when things are different than they are normally. Now, in the middle of this, there were some news articles and pictures of Ted Cruz, who's one of the senators of the state of Texas. He was flying his daughters out to Cancun or whatever, and a lot of people were tripping, saying he should have been here. Honestly, I couldn't care less. He has a federal job. He was off from that job. The Senate was out for that week, and he wanted to take his daughters. His power and water was out at his house, and if I could have taken my family to Cancun, I would have. Who would be staying around in no power, no water, Texas, when you can go somewhere? So I think a lot of people are being dramatic about that. There was nothing that he was going to do in Texas that he couldn't do with a phone and a computer or a tablet device, whatever, that he wasn't going to be able to do in Cancun, that he was going to do in Houston. They wanted him to be here handing out water bottles and other stupid stuff like that, which I think is ridiculous. People need to grow up There's nothing that's going to help my life by him being here and also suffering in cold temperatures. And it's time to grow up. So I don't really have a whole lot to say about Ted Cruz other than who cares? So, particular thing about the state of Texas has its own power grid. The rest of the country is divided into two power grids. There's a western and an eastern power grid, and they are all the states kind of get together and they run these things together. And what you have is when you have an issue in one state, things can be transported from another state where, you know, if Nevada's having a power problem, they can get some power from Montana or Utah and things like that. You constantly have issues over in California because of their state mismanagement. But Texas, not wanting to be a part of federal regulations and not having to rely on everywhere else, we have our own power grid. Texas has its own power grid. So not wanting to rely on other states and things like that and having to deal with those federal regulations, Texas has its own power grid, which has been working great. There are times when there are electrical issues in other parts of the country and where Texas hasn't been affected. Texas has been doing well with that for many years, and they had this one really catastrophic screw up, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But since they're on their own grid, it was very difficult for Texas to be able to get help from other states, and a lot of the problems were caused by the Texas leadership, not so much the government leadership, partially the government leadership, which we're going to talk about, but there's also a group of people that run that power grid, and just they didn't do what they were supposed to do to take care of things. One of the good things about Texas being on its own grid is that they miss a lot of things that hit the rest of the country. I remember some years ago there was a blackout all over Michigan and maybe some other parts in the east, and I don't even remember why it was caused, but I remember Texas being completely fine in that state. And again, all the stuff that goes on in California up the Pacific Northwest when they're having power issues and things like that, Texas has been running smooth for a long time. There are a lot of calls, particularly from leftists and tree huggers and greenies, saying that we need to rely more on green energy when green energy is what failed the most in this catastrophe. There's a couple articles linked below that you should read if you really want to have a good view of what was going on. But the turbine, we had some wind turbines. Texas has been growing and increasing in wind and solar energy. There wasn't much solar energy being produced because it was cloudy and stormy, and the turbines froze up, quit working because they weren't equipped and ready for that, and they just froze because they were out in the cold air. They're not made for that. So what they want to consider as super green renewable energy is not very reliable energy. So if you look in the articles below, wind and solar perform the absolute worst. Coal and natural gas and nuclear did better, although they all had their issues. So the primary problem in my mind is threefold from the interviews and information that I've been able to get access to. Number one, Texas has drifted toward the left, even though we've had red governors for a long time that are part of the Republicans. We've over diversified. I believe that we should use whatever energy works the best, whatever that is. But there's obviously been this push by the left to change everything, like the Green New Deal, push everything toward what they consider to be renewable, which really isn't renewable because it's not like you can use it and do something to it and use it again. So you don't renew it, you capture it, you use it, and then you go capture more, which is the same thing that happens with fossil fuels and things that are in the earth. But anyway, we'll talk more about that another day, another video. So one, if you look at the history of Texas, about 10 years ago, after the Super Bowl was played in Dallas, there was a really cold snap. I think we had some rolling power outages and things like that in Texas, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Since then, the temperatures weren't much different this last week. It was a little bit colder. but it wasn't much different. They had these same issues, the same weather about 30 years ago, and it was actually a little bit colder. And so it's not that Texas never gets cold, it's just that it doesn't usually get cold. And so we're not super prepared for that. But one of the things that the Texas Commission on Energy didn't do was they didn't winterize plants, which means that inside the plants, things were shutting down because they were too cold. And then two, we spread out too much and we had too much renewable energy. And so Texas has increased their wind energy and solar capacity to like 25% of the power of Texas is coming from the so-called renewable energy sources, which are not reliable. Those things let down and cause the effect of stacking up and other things to go down. So you'll see some fact checkers, some people that are on the left that want to say, no, it's really not that. It wasn't the wind. It was the wind. Okay, the wind turbines quit working first. And if you look at even the diminished outputs of all the different energy sources, wind and solar was still completely dead last. And so the state has spent billions of dollars investing and putting money toward wind and solar energy, and we're not getting anything for it. So I believe we absolutely need to decrease the so-called green energy usage in the state of Texas. Two, they just need to winterize the plants. I mean, that doesn't make sense. You know it's going to get cold at some point. You know it's not going to be super predictable, and so you obviously need to prepare for that. And winterizing a power plant just seems like a no-brainer. So there's certainly some people that are in charge of electricity in Texas that need to get fired, get some other people in. There were recommendations that were made a long time ago, some years ago, after some other cold weather events, and they just didn't do all the things that they were supposed to do. Another difference from the last cold snap about a decade ago, and then obviously from 30 years ago, we have 25% of our energy coming from wind and solar. We have 20% more greater population in the Texas area. And there have been 3 coal or nuclear plants that have been taken offline because of the shift in the investment of the wind and solar energy. So we have less of the reliable energies that we need, more of the unreliable energy, and there's a lot more people fleeing their terrible blue states. People coming here because of taxes, weather, those other kind of things. And so the population in Texas has been booming like several red states. So what needs to happen? Again, get rid of the people who didn't follow the last recommendations in the electric community or commissions, coalitions, whatever you want to call them. We definitely need to cut back on all the wind or solar. They're not proving their value. You know, we're putting billions of dollars in and we're getting thousands of dollars worth of value out, if you will. We also just have to winterize the plants. And I think after we do those 3 things, we'll be able to move on. I think under no circumstances should Texas join the other power grids or the federal regulations. Certainly this was a catastrophe. It was a huge failure, but it was one failure. It can be fixed and things will be a lot better. The only other thing I wanted to mention was skyrocketing bills. All right, there are a lot of electric bills that you may have seen on the news or on the internet somewhere. Those bills skyrocketed in Texas, in different parts of Texas. Energy is deregulated, which means you can get your power from wherever you want. So if you're in a city like San Antonio, the city owns the power and you pay them directly and you don't have a choice. In a city like Houston, and believe in Dallas, you can choose your energy provider, and so you can shop rates. Well, there are people who have decided that they wanted to do like a wholesale rate, and normally it's great, you save money, it's a good thing. But when all the stuff dropped in this last week, the energy prices skyrocketed because of supply and demand. And so now people are upset that they have these exorbitant bills, which are huge, but that's kind of what you sign up for. So I'm a little bit 50-50 on that. Yes, you know, people should have to pay for stuff where, you know, there's an upside to it, there's a downside to it. You have to take the risk. But the government, the people that oversee the energy, they're the ones that caused the problem because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. So there's going to have to be some middle ground. I'm normally not for the government bailing out people from their own personal responsibilities, but in this case, I think there's something that should be done on both sides. I believe that's it. Just wanted to get this out for you real quick. Like I said, make sure you like, subscribe. I'm going to have another video just about some basics on preparing for unforeseen events. That'll be coming out very, very soon. Make sure you subscribe so you'll know when that comes out. So that's it about the Texas winter storms. I don't think it's that much of a big deal anymore. We should be able to move on, make some small adjustments, and continue to live life fully. All right, my friends, that's it. I'm C. Scott. I'm out of here.